Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Data's Day, which is episode 11 of season 4 of Star Trek Next Generation. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek Next Generation, one episode at a time. In this video, I cover the 4th season episode Data's Day. So Data's Day is the episode that focuses on Data and how he reacts in a normal day. In this case, he is being the father of the bride, where Chief O'Brien is marrying Keiko, and Data apparently introduced these two people, and he's preparing for the wedding. At the same time, there's a Vulcan ambassador on a mission to do peace negotiations with the Romulan Empire. She apparently dies in a transporter accident, but it's later discovered that she was in fact a Romulan spy all along and was just trying to return home to her people. After this, Data learns how to dance and dances at the wedding and concludes his letter to Maddox about how he relates to human beings. Even though he feels no emotion, he can understand the need for friendship and the desire for love. So this is I don't know. This has always been a tricky episode for me. If I remember correctly, and I might not remember correctly, but I seem to think that my sister felt this episode was overrated and didn't really care for it. So the concept of it was a day in a life, or I've even heard some people call it slice of life. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard the term slice of life before, but I hate the slice of life genre because I read a lot of. It was very popular in New Zealand when I lived there, particularly with novels. Whenever I would be like, oh, these are the best short novels ever, and I'd read them, and they'd be so fucking boring. And they would call it a slice of life. What it basically is describing a normal event. There was like no plot line, no drama, no suspense. It was just like a normal day, and it was supposed to be introspective and very philosophical about people living their life day by day, and that's fucking boring. And there's some movies out there too, maybe like mostly indie movies. Like to me, the most popular one was Lost in Translation, which I wanted to kill myself when I was watching that movie because it was so goddamn boring. And so that's what I think of when I think of slice of life. It's just boring as fuck, not any creative or any inventive. But here's the thing. This is why I hate slice of life. I watch entertainment, I watch movies, TVs, I read books to escape life, to get some fantasy, to get out of my everyday life. I don't want to experience other people's everyday mundane life. It still boggles my mind why the fuck people would find that interesting. Now, you do have some slice of life stories like What's Eating Gilbert Grape, where it does put you in the mindset of people you may not be familiar with, someone who's morbidly obese, who has a disabled, mentally disabled son, and I don't know, in that situation, people are like, ooh, that's so fascinating, it's getting into, but for me, it's just boring as hell, and I don't like stuff like that. Now, to be fair, I don't think this episode is slice of life in the sense that the stuff that bores the hell out of me. First of all, the simple virtue of it being set in the Star Trek universe precludes it being boring to me, or boring slice of life. So slice of life in Star Trek to me is immediately a giant step up for normal slice of life, because it's already in a fantastical setting. Even if you try to say, oh, this is an ordinary day, on the Enterprise is still a fantastical setting with fantastical characters, so that automatically makes it interesting to me, whereas you just get normal everyday character or modern day realistic normal people and like this is how they live their life. It will always baffle me how anyone could possibly find that interesting. even if you say, oh, this person is struggling with addiction, or they're struggling with a disability, or they're weird in some way, or they're coming of age, or anything like that, it still doesn't work for me. Now, as I said, I don't think this is boring, and I wouldn't put it in that category of slice of life. But I think I wouldn't call it slice of life. I would say day in the life would be more apt, more appropriate, because it's a day in the life of Data, and I find that very interesting. I find that concept interesting, and let's be honest here, it's not a normal Monday day. Because, well, first of all, you got the side plot with the Romulan spy, which I'll get into shortly, or later on. You also have a wedding going on, which is not an everyday occurrence. And it's interesting to see events like that from Data's perspective and learn more about Data. Now, one complaint that I've heard, and I believe I heard this complaint from my sister, is... and it's a complaint, to be fair, I've made myself, is that Data comes off as kind of out of character. And I think it's a virtue of, since they're focusing on him, they want to sort of accentuate how, I don't know, just how out of character he is. Because, like this scene, for example, when Keiko says, oh, I'm going to call off the wedding. Can you tell Miles I'm calling off the wedding because this is what I want to be happy? And Data goes up to Miles and it's like, I have good news. Keiko has called off the wedding. Like, I don't think he's that obtuse. I don't think he's that dumb. I think this is out of character for Data. They're exaggerating his sort of android attributes and his misunderstanding of human behavior in order to... And they do this a lot, frequently, to be fair, but not to this degree, which I think is inconsistent with this character. But to be fair, there's other parts of this episode that do show him as having the human attributes that we know that he has, which for me makes him a lot more interesting character. But there's always also the aspects of this episode where he is just being obtuse. And it's funny, later he will go to Crusher, and when he's investigating the Vulcan ambassador's death, and he wants some information. She asks, oh, why would you like this information? He says, I may be pursuing an untamed Orthord without cause. I don't even know if I pronounced that correctly. And then Crusher's like, what, wild goose chase? And he goes... Now, that's something Data has kind of gotten over. That's like something that he used to do in Season 1 and Season 2, particularly Season 1, was he would reframe like common sayings, but do it in a way that is, using more technical terms or different terminology and being like, I believe I just said that. Like, he shouldn't be doing that anymore. He's kind of grown out of that, in my opinion. And so, yeah, aspects of that I wasn't a huge fan of, but I think there are other aspects of this episode that do help it a lot. For example, we get the introduction of Data's cat in this episode. And I've been waiting for this. Now, they don't name it Spot in this episode. In fact, it's an orange cat. Later, Spot would be, can't remember the color, like gray or something. So some people speculate that Data got a different cat, that he got this cat and he didn't take care of it and it died, so he got another cat. I think that's cruel. I don't like that theory. I think that's totally wrong. I think it's just the production value. They decided to change the cats around. They were using a different cat when they were filming, and they kind of forgot which color the cat was or didn't care. I think that's all there is. It's a production thing. I hate coming up with in-universe excuses for what is obviously production issues. But anyway, I love the idea of Data having a cat. Well, I say that as a cat lover myself, but it really humanizes it, and it makes sense that the reason why he would want a cat is to try to experience what it's like to be a human more, and why they have connections to animals like this. And later on, particularly in the 7th season, they kind of explore this a bit more, and I think it goes a long way to humanize the character, and he has this like relationship with Spot. I think I love it. I think this is a great addition to the show. That this is the kind of thing I'm talking about, where they really explore his character a bit more and the human side of his character. Now, the framing of this episode is pretty interesting because it's a letter to Bruce Maddox is what we get with the narration. So it's an excuse to have a narration. They actually did the same thing on Enterprise with Dear Doctor, where they did a Phlox Day in the Life episode, and he was writing a letter to his friend. I can't even remember his friend's name, but his friend who was a human who was living on Denobula in an exchange program, and he was, telling what it was like living with humans on Enterprise. And here they have Data. I believe at the start he was saying that Maddox, they were corresponding about Maddox trying to further cybernetics and find ways to make other androids, and he requested certain information. I was going to say data, but that's confusing. He requested certain information from Data about himself and how to do that, and Data for some reason thought it would be advantageous to describe how he behaves in a day and what his thought process is. And that makes a lot of sense. Now, I remember some people saying, like, oh, Maddox was the fucking asshole who tried to have Data disassembled and, like, take away his rights and compared him to a replicator. And so why is Data fucking communicating with that jerk asshead? But anyway, it actually makes sense. I mean, first of all, he had a unrealistic character turn at the end of the episode where he's like, he's remarkable. And I bitched about that, and I don't think that I didn't buy that. But it happened, whether I buy it or not. Maddox, by the end of the episode, respected Data as an individual. And further, I do like how they explore Data's human side, but he is still an android, and he still is not one to hold a grudge, especially if Maddox is now working with Data and that they've been corresponding and that he's been cordial. It makes all the sense in the world that Data would be cordial back and that he would respond back and make a letter about it. And also, this is kind of really the main setup for Picard, as much as I don't like that show. Picard Season 1, that had Maddox reappear, played by a different actor, but it had him reappear, and apparently he had created a whole colony of androids along with this fucking son of Dr. Soon, who just fucking appeared out of nowhere. But the less said about him, the better. But it kind of sets the stage for that, because, as I said, the Maddox and Measure Man was kind of an asshole, but this episode further established the idea that he's actually gained respect for androids and sort of on a character growth, like a character journey to eventually become someone who's like the father of androids and who's like going against the laws to create a planet in secret where a society of androids. Too bad he was freaking killed by his own girlfriend. Like, I hate that shit, but that's Picard. I'm not gonna talk about that, but it's interesting. It does set the stage for that. So I did like that quite a bit. So another thing that I really like in this episode is when Data's talking to Counselor Troy. Now, he's trying to get advice on how to handle Keiko and Miles, and because they're both coming to him separately and being like, oh, can you talk to the other one? And so he goes to Troy for advice, and I think this is like a beautiful thing. I kind of love whenever Troy and Data interact. I'm starting to wish we got more of that, and I said in the previous video that I think they should have been a couple, and I'm kind of stand by that. But what I love, because he's confused by the humanoid behavior, so he goes to Troy, who's all about emotions and this kind of thing for advice, which is like the really smart thing to do. And they actually have her like give good advice and be like, look, maybe the best thing to do is just stay out of it and let them sort it out. And they're talking about the benefits of marriage and the aspects of marriage. And Data brings up, one day I would like to get married. I could see myself getting married. I think I have a lot to offer a potential mate. And then Troy goes over and sort of, side hugs Data. And it's like, you're right, Data. You do have a lot to offer. That was a touching scene. Like, I fucking love that. But it makes me really disappointed, though, because they never went anywhere with this. Arguably, this led to the episode In Theory that happens at the end of the season, which I'll get to. But suffice to say, I'm not a fan of that episode, mainly because I don't think she was the right fit for Data, and also it kind of portrayed Data as sucking at relationship. That's an episode that didn't show his human side. It showed him as an unfeeling, dumb android, and that's what I hate about it. But more to the point, I didn't like it because it was a one-off. They just broke up. They got together and broke up in the same episode. Fuck that shit. We should have had him get together in a long-term relationship with someone, and he should have gotten married eventually. I think that would have been awesome if Data got married. And to me, that's one of the biggest regrets. Now, if they ever do a legacy show or continue the story from Picard Season 3, they might be able to bring that up now that Data's more human-like. He has emotions and whatnot. But, I would love for them to do that. But it still wouldn't change the fact that they squandered the storyline, that they should have done it in Next Generation itself. And the fact they never did, to me, was a real missed opportunity. And this episode kind of showcases that to me. I have found it fascinating that he's entertaining the aspect of falling in love. And on top of that, towards the end of the episode, as I mentioned in my summary, when he's doing his summary to Maddox about, summing up the day at O'Brien's wedding and being like, I understand the even though I don't have emotions and I don't feel the same way humans do, I still understand the concept of wanting to have a friendship and wanting to have friends and wanting to be loved. And that's what I think they should have explored more. I think they should have explored, and this is what In Theory failed to do, because he was just kind of obtuse and dumb and totally ignorant of human emotions, where here he's actually portraying an understanding of human, as I said, like a desire for love and friendship. And it's disappointing that they never handled this correctly. So let's talk about the night shift. This is something that doesn't particularly make any sense. So first of all, I don't like the aspect that they forced Data to do the night shift just because he's an android that doesn't sleep. Maybe he doesn't want to do the night shift. Like, why are they putting on the night shift? But more to the point, why the fuck do they dim the lights? Like, that makes no sense whatsoever. Now, apparently I heard it's a naval tradition, but in the Navy, they're on Earth, where the sun goes up and the sun goes down. They're in fucking space. the sun is never up or down. They're in space. All the light is always artificial. The sleep cycle is always artificial. It's not dependent on the Earth rotation or the sun rotation or anything like that. So why the fuck would they dim the goddamn lights? What about the people who are working that shift? Especially if it's the night rotation. If they do have, because I understand the need, a desire to imitate Earth's 24-hour day. That would mean the people working the night shift have to have a different rotation from most people. And they probably would have a hard time staying awake if you dim the fucking lights. Like, I've flown the super long flights from New Zealand to America that were, I've done 16 hours straight before, and they dim the lights for nighttime in the plane. But I almost guarantee you that they don't fucking they dim the lights for the passengers, but they probably don't dim the goddamn lights for the fucking pilots who are trying to stay awake. And so it just makes no sense on why on the bridge. Now, granted, if you had like other parts of the ship, maybe the corridors, especially outside the living quarters, you want to dim the lights there, like, okay. But on the fucking bridge, when they're like trying to operate the ship, that just makes no sense. It's always baffled me, and I think it's stupid. Anyway, another thing I've heard people talk about was the replicator scene, because there's a scene where Worf is getting a wedding gift for O'Brien, and Data comes up to him and asks his advice, which I actually think is a nice scene. I do like that interaction between the two. There's a lot of similarities between Data and Worf, how they're both kind of outsiders in the human culture, and having Worf, who grew up among humans but is a Klingon, sort of explain human culture to Data was very fascinating. But let's focus on the main thing here, the replicators. And this is a society that doesn't use money, and it has replicators that can create everything. So I've heard some people ponder why it is that they're keeping the tradition of wedding gifts and giving gifts to the O'Briens, when the O'Briens could always go and replicate whatever the fuck they want. Because there's no money. Like, it's different in the modern day. When you give someone a gift, you go out and you spend your money so they don't have to spend the money, and so it's different. But here, I actually strongly disagree with that. I think it makes perfect sense for them to still give gifts in the 24th century, even though anyone can go at any time and replicate whatever the fuck they want. Because I would argue, even in the 20th century, even there's some people, I'm not even talking about the super mega wealthy, just people who were sort of upper middle class and people who were sort of better off, who were money, like buying the kind of things that you would buy at a wedding normally that was like between $50 and $100. Like, that's less than a drop in the bucket to them. I'm not, again, normal people, not like the mega wealthy or anything like that. And so money's not an issue there either. So the fact that the 24th century there's no money, to me, is not much different than a lot of people, even in modern day times. Because, and even the people getting married, it's not like they need the money. It's that it's more of the thought that counts. I'm sorry to say cliche, but it's true. And also, it's the O'Briens could go to the replicator and replicate whatever they want, but a lot of couples who are getting married could go out to the store and buy the shit that they're getting in as well. The thing is the concept, and this is something that Data and Worf actually talk about in this episode, the concept of this is a gift from someone. Like, and someone who put a lot of thought into it, and as Data said, like, the gifts is supposed to sort of represent the person giving the gift and make them think of them, and it's supposed to conjure the feeling, and it's that someone went out to the replicators and specifically picked something that they liked and that they thought that you would enjoy and that you would have, and so receiving that thing would be like, oh, this is from Data, oh, this is great, I'm going to put it up on the shelf and it'll always remind me of Data. That's the point. The point isn't to acquire things. The point is the concept of gift giving, and it makes total sense to me that this tradition would survive even in this post-scarcity society. But anyway, something else I wanted to point out is when at one point Data is talking about all the events going on on the Enterprise at the day, he casually mentions a Hindu festival of lights that's being celebrated on the Enterprise. Now, to me, this immediately, as soon as I heard this, I thought of all of the fucking idiots who were whining and bitching about the Lower Decks episode. So there was this Lower Decks episode that came out that had people running around half naked and doing all this crazy shit. But apparently, and I didn't even notice this, it had animated into the scene was a Starfleet officer wearing a hijab. And I didn't even notice that. And once someone pointed it out to me, I was like, huh, alright, whatever. That's fine. But apparently some people flipped their fucking lid over this because that's a religion. And there are no religions in Star Trek because the Gene Roddenberry's perfect vision of the future is atheism and atheists, and they don't care about religion. No, they never mention Christianity or anything like that, so why would there be a Muslim traditions in there? And I'm an atheist myself. I've said that before, and I love that aspect of Star Trek. But they never said, they do hint at certain Christian traditions, like even the original series mentioned, I think they mentioned Thanksgiving, and they mentioned, not that that's Christian, but they mentioned Christmas. I know Christmas was brought up in Generations, and so if they continue Christian traditions, why the fuck wouldn't they continue Hindu traditions? And and my main point to bring this up is, and I didn't realize it because I forgot about this dialogue, this line from this episode, is the people bitching about Lower Decks forgot that they already mentioned the Hindu Festival of Lights all the way back in season 4 of Next Generation. So those people are like, oh, it's against Roddenberry's vision. By the way, Roddenberry still involved with the show at this point, barely though, because his health was failing, but still involved with the show. And this is still classic Star Trek that people revere and say, oh, Next Generation would never do this, but they fucking did. But anyway, I don't know. People would just be stupid for stupid reasons. Anyway, I want to talk about the scene on the bridge where Riker is hitting on this ensign. Well, he's telling a joke, but Data is, ruminating on the link between humor and sex. So I think it's implied he's hitting on her. This was Ensign Kellogg. Now, this is someone I recognize. There were, because I've seen season 4 so much, this is the season I've seen the most, there were several of the background recurring characters, and some of them continued onward through season 5 and 6, but there are some that and some were just in season 6, not even this season, but there's some that I've really noticed, and I made a point to, learn their characters, and Ensign Kellogg was one of them. She's a security officer who we see several times with Worf. To my knowledge, never has a line of dialogue, so technically an extra. But she's recurring. They show her a lot, and they gave her a name, Ensign Kellogg. And I used to want to write. I never got around to doing this, but I wanted to write a fan fiction story that focused on like a group. And I think it was even before the episode Lower Decks came out, and it was like a similar concept. I wanted to focus on some of these background ensigns, and I remember Ensign Kellogg would have been the main character in my story. There's another character coming up who I don't think we've been introduced to yet, who would be the main focus of my story, but I'll get to that later on when they focus on her more. But there's a lot of like reoccurring helmsmen after Wesley left that would be reoccurring and would rotate. But Ensign Kellogg was the one that was the security officer, and that stood out to me. But anyway, I thought I would mention, and apparently and something I didn't know before, but the actor who played Ensign Kellogg was apparently a photo double for Gates McFadden, and so would often dress up like Beverly. And someone said that she was a stunt double, but I don't think so. I don't think it was stunts. It was just a photo double, like their double that comes out and does the when the actors, just so the actor doesn't get exhausted, and so they can do stuff like being a stand-in, that's the word I'm looking for. So like when they're setting up lights and stuff like that, and so they would dress up like the other person. And so she did that for Beverly, and she apparently did that for a lot of guest actors as well. And she played some background aliens, like I believe they said she played a Cardassian once and a Romulan. So I just thought that was very interesting. Anyway, so there's the dancing scene where Data goes to Dr. Crusher, calls her the dancing doctor, and wants her to teach him how to dance, and she goes and teaches him tap dancing because that's what she was known for. And then Data's like, excellent, I'm now ready to dance at the wedding. And Crusher's like, wait a second, you never said this was for the wedding. Now I've heard some people complain about this, that Data would be this stupid to not realize this is not the right kind of dancing. But I do buy. I do really buy that Data wouldn't understand, and that there's different kinds of dancing, because even when Crusher brings it up, like, no, they don't do this kind of dancing at the wedding. He's like, why? And she's like, well, I don't know. They just don't. And that's the truth. It's like a tradition. And I totally buy that Data would not be aware of the nuances, because they really honestly don't make that much sense. It's just a cultural thing. There's no logical reason why they don't tap dance. Well, maybe because it's harder. But really, it's why they do the slow dance or whatever. And I'm surprised, Dr. Crusher should have taught Data the Macarena, because they seem to do that at weddings. Or the other kind of just like crazy dances. But anyway, not just the slow dance, but they definitely do slow dances at wedding. And he's being a surrogate for the father of the bride. That's a tradition for the father of the bride to dance with the bride. So that is something that would totally be expected to him. And this is something that Keiko should have checked on and made sure when she asked him to do this, but you know how to dance, right? But instead of Data totally didn't even know he was supposed to dance until Worf brought it up. So that seems a bit I don't know who the fuck's playing this wedding, but it seems a bit neglectful that they didn't even check to inform Data that he needed to dance. But anyway, I did totally buy that. I thought it was a really interesting portrayal that Data was excellent at tap dancing and learned it instantly, which is something that, I loved how Beverly was getting irritated because she was like, not bad. Because she was just so flummoxed that because she probably took years and years to learn how to tap dance like that, and the fact that Data just picked it up like that would irritate the hell out of her. But then something as simple as the slow dance, which most people see as ordinary and easy, that was much harder for him to learn. I like that. I think that makes a lot of sense, because I think androids would learn differently than human beings, and like moves that humans find complex might be easier to androids, whereas stuff that's more abstract, like the slow dance, would be a harder thing for him to learn. And they were teaching Data that he had to lead. I always hate that tradition that the men had to lead. I was always terrible. I used to sometimes I forced the women to lead because I just hated doing this. Say what you will, and I sucked at it. I will never pretend that I was actually any good at dancing. I never have been any kind. But anyway, of course, this should be noted that Gates McFadden was a choreographer. I believe she choreographed Labyrinth, the movie Labyrinth. I remember seeing a picture of her when she was younger, with all these puppets. and so she choreographed this dance scene, and she did all the dancing. There, of course, were some scenes where Brent Spiner had to use a double. But yeah, that was very interesting. That she choreographed that, and that's obviously why they chose to make up the thing about the dancing doctor, because the actress already had the skill. It's kind of like they did the same thing in Strange New Worlds, where the actor who played Dr. Mugga happened also to be like a trained fighter, so then they gave Mbaga the skill of fighting, being this veteran in the war who is trained in this fighting because of the actor had that skill. It makes a degree of sense. Like, if the actor has this skill, then why not take advantage of that? Anyway, so let's talk about the wedding. Let's get into this O'Brien wedding, which I've been kind of skirting around. So apparently the original idea was to have Picard get married. And I'm so glad they decided against that, because if they did the same, like introducing a wife for O'Brien in this episode, who came out of nowhere and who we'd never heard of her, that's fine, because O'Brien is a very tertiary character who we don't really know very well. He's just there to like tell the occasional joke and stand there at the transporter and spout out technobabble most of the time and just be like transport people from place to place. He's just a very side character who has prepared a lot, to be fair, but still a side character. So if they say this side character had this girlfriend ongoing on the side, well, fine. That's easy to buy. But to say a main character, especially the main character, the captain of the ship, has had this girlfriend that we've never seen before, that would be total bullshit. And I would be like, who the fuck is this woman? Why the fuck where did she get off thinking she can marry the goddamn captain? And for example of this, Benjamin Sisko in Deep Space Nine, he got remarried I should say, but he got remarried, and they totally sold that because they introduced Cassidy Yates. They had Jake set him up on a date, and then they had him start to date her and showed that they were falling in love, and like I believe something like 3 years later they finally get married. That's the way you do a storyline like that. If you want to have the captain get married, you gotta ease into that shit. You gotta slowly introduce, and you don't necessarily need to wait 3 years. You could do it in 1 year, but still, you have to build it. And I know TNG's too episodic, and they don't like doing that. Although I've been covering season 4, has been going back to that continuity a lot. Definitely a lot more than previous seasons. But so they could have done it if they wanted to marry off Picard. They could do it, but not in this episode. Like, they need to fucking build to it. It just can't happen out of nowhere. So thank God they didn't do that. And I heard some people speculate, oh, what if they had him marry Vosh? Now, mind you, this is before the episode Cupid came out, so Vosh had only appeared in one episode, Captain's Holiday. And I'm sorry, like, some people said that they had no chemistry, which I disagreed with. I thought they had the chemistry, but the kind of chemistry that's like a fling. Not there. She is not marriage material. I would not at all buy, especially after only the one appearance. That would still be terrible, and I wouldn't buy it in a billion years. Especially the kind of character that Vosh was. Now, theoretically, if there was someone like Commander Darren, who appeared in the episode Lessons over in season 6, if they brought her back after only one appearance and said, oh, they're getting married now, that I could buy, because she seemed like the marrying type, and they had a bit stronger chemistry, although they would have to address the same issue of why she left the ship in the first place, of the fact of being, they couldn't reconcile being him being her superior when, at the same time being in a romantic relationship. But I'll get to that episode eventually. But anyway, speaking of Picard, when he married, officiated in the wedding and said the things about since the days of the wooden ships, when he was talking about, marriage, that is word for word from Balance of Terror. That's exactly what Kirk said when he officiated over that wedding, and I love that. And I was actually surprised over the years to hear some people be surprised about that and like, oh, well, that's word for word from, I had no idea. I was like, this is something I learned really early on. I think part of that is that I was watching these two episodes for the first time around the same time. Because as I talked about, I was watching the original series for the first time and The Next Generation for the first time. And I do think around this time I saw Balance of Terror for the first time, and then I saw this episode close back to back practically, and I was like, oh, wait, they're saying the same thing. So, yeah, that's something that I always knew. Now, as for Keiko O'Brien, who is a recurring character who would continue onward for quite some time because she would go over to Deep Space Nine with Miles, this is her first appearance, and that's kind of hard to believe. But I think actually, as I said, I didn't mind the fact that she popped up out of nowhere because Miles wasn't that important of a character. But more than that, I think they did a really good job of making her feel like she had always been there, and not in a jarring way. Like there's sometimes I talked about where they try to introduce characters who's supposed to have this huge backstory or history together, where I'm like, I don't buy it. This is jarring. It wasn't jarring, and I think the actress does an amazing job. And a lot of people complain about the Miles and Keiko relationship and think that they're not good for each other and always, arguing with each other and they shouldn't be together, they have no chemistry, which I disagree with. I always love this couple because they come off as realistic. They come off as how couples really sort of interact with each other, and I think this whole cold feet storyline in this episode it's part of that. It adds to that. It adds to their charm, and also like how it gave Data a dilemma on how to deal with it, and that the solution was just to stand back. And I think Keiko, her character would not change very much going forward to Deep Space Nine, and I think it's great that they introduced her here. I thought it was a great introduction. So, let me talk about the A plot, B plot, because I talked in the two previous episodes about how season 4 and 5, and maybe some later seasons, but definitely Voyager, would do this typical format where they would have an A plot that was a character story, and the B plot would be some anomaly, bullshit nonsense that had nothing to do with anything. And the two of them were like very separate, and it was a format I totally fucking hate. And this episode clearly has an A plot, B plot, with the A plot being Data's, dealing with O'Brien wedding and his everyday, day-to-day stuff and whatnot. And then the B plot, of course, is a Vulcan ambassador who turns out to be a Romulan spy. But one thing I want to make very clear is I don't think this episode falls in the same category I was talking about earlier, particularly in the 2 previous episodes. I don't think it's a rigid A plot, B plot, where the B plot is some throwaway nonsense. I actually think that they integrated the 2 plots very well. I was actually impressed with how well, and in fact, I don't know if this Romulan spy thing would have worked as its own episode, first of all. I mean, maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't, but the one thing I do know for certain is that it totally works in this context. I love the fact that we only see it from Data's perspective, and Data is not a major player in that storyline, that Picard is the main one dealing with this, and we can kind of glean what's going on through Data's brief interactions, but he's just seeing it as a tertiary character, and we're seeing it through his eyes. I also actually thought that was brilliant, and I love the fact Data is the one who eventually puts together that she didn't die and that the Romulans kidnapped her or abducted her. I thought that was amazing. I actually love this B plot, and particularly how they did it in this episode. I think it enhanced the episode a lot. It didn't seem jarring at all. I actually was really impressed how these 2 plots integrated with each other so seamlessly, and I think this is probably more interesting if they did a main storyline with this Romulan spy thing and focused more on that and developed more on that. I don't think it would be that interesting. I think it's way better doing it this way. But one thing I do feel like I have to point out is there was this meme that I used to see online from it was 10 years ago or something. It was a long time ago. But there used to be this meme about that was from this episode. So, the scene where the Picard goes charging back in the neutral zone, and he's talking to Admiral Mindock, or whatever his name is, Romulan on the Romulan ship, and he's demanding that the Vulcan ambassador be returned, and he goes to reveal that the Vulcan ambassador is actually a Romulan spy. He puts his arm out like this, and then she enters the room, and it's the Romulan spy. Now here's the thing, in the background of the room he was in, there was this weird, I'll probably put the screenshot of it, but there was this weird strange looking device right behind him, and so they took a screenshot of him doing here's the thing, but it looked like he was pointing to that weird device behind him because it was before the Romulan spy walked on the bridge. So there was the meme. There was him pointing at this weird device. And I can't believe I can't remember exactly what it said. But it said something along the lines of, I have no idea what the fuck this thing is, but it looks cool. Or something along those lines. And I don't know why. I thought that was the funniest thing ever. I remember laughing my ass off about that. So that's what I think about now every time I see this scene. I don't know what the fuck this thing is, but it looks kind of cool. Anyway, I would now like to thank my Patreon supporters for supporting me on Patreon. It's very much appreciated. This helped me continue with the channel, keeps me going, and I am really thankful. I want to give a special thanks to Brandon Neilhouse for his support over the years. Really appreciate that. And also give a shout out to Antarius, Greg Marley, Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky Matty Jester, Joel Valls, Alessandro Miguelcio, Norman Buchwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, and Allison Fordyce. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. So we do have a few Patreon comments on this episode. First comment is from Stephen Kennedy, who says, Harold Apter wrote Data's Day, and Ronald D. Moore wrote The Spy. This may be the worst attempt at adapting two completely different stories in the same episode. It feels like Deanna Troi lost her superpower for about 50% of the run of TNG. We meet Keiko and Spot for the first time. Miles should have waited to get married on DS9, as Sisko would have allowed an Irish wedding. Was Beverly's character still in Don't Remember Me episode? She didn't realize that Data wanted to learn dancing for the wedding and not tap dancing. Maybe she wasn't invited, as Miles hates seeing her because he is sick of dislocating his shoulder kayaking. My rating is 7. Riker needs a date for the wedding, so he tried flirting with a security officer on the bridge, then smiled at her when he walked away, and she smiled back. And yes, I have eagle eyes when it comes to Riker womanizing, but he was with Troi at the wedding. Someone called her and said don't bother with him, as he always goes back to Deanna. Out of 10. Oh God, that's again a long paragraph of something out of 10. Like, this is like, it's pretty soon it's going to be like 2 pages. Anyway, I've already stated that I disagree with the fact that the two stories were jarring. I actually think they were integrated beautifully. I think, and especially since I think there were other episodes where they didn't integrate two ideas well, and they felt like bumping heads. I think Sins of the Father is a prime example of that for me. But the worst example is Coda, the Voyager episode. That is easily the worst example of them trying to put not just 2 but several story ideas and cram them together, and they do not work and come off as laughably bad. But yeah, I mean, you do kind of make a good point that Crusher should have realized when Data says I want to learn to dance that there's a wedding that he's going to be at, and he's acting as father of the bride, so he wants to learn how to dance. But whatever. Anyway, next comment is from Greg Marley, who says, I always think of this as paired with In Theory, because both show us smaller, more incidental moments in Data's life and end up reminding us how much we like this character. I also like the scene where Data oversees the night shift on the bridge and the lighting dims as night shift begins. It subtly generates a sense of reality where we're watching a world with the same rhymes as ours, where our heroes aren't on duty 100% of the time. Yeah, why the fuck are they dimming the lights? I can't get over that. Like, that's just gonna put people who are supposed to be on duty, keeping people alive, running this flagship of the entire Starfleet. It's just gonna put them to sleep. Anyway, alright, another thing I wanted to mention with Steven's comment that I forgot to mention is Troi, the fact that her powers don't work 50% of the time. I did mention this in my review for the previous episode, The Loss, how in this episode, she should have fucking known that the Vulcan ambassador was actually a Romulan spy. She should have been able to empathically tell the difference between Romulans and Vulcans, especially considering Vulcans spent their entire long-ass fucking lives training to suppress their emotions, and Romulans don't. And that's maybe something that they can emulate outwardly, but enough to fool an empath? Bullshit. And also, the fact that she was obviously deceiving them is another bullshit thing that she should have... I don't know. It's an ongoing issue with the writers not writing Troi correctly. They just ignore her powers when they're inconvenient for the plot. So, next comment is from Norman Buckwald, who says, the first epistolary narrative that I can recall in Trek I really like Data's Day. As far as I'm concerned, the true A story is the storytelling, what Data is sharing to Maddox in his letter, and it adds all sorts of touches, such as the special replicators used to materialize wedding gifts and other manufacturing items, and Data on the night shift at the same time as he wasn't sleeping as of yet. The stories about Miles and Keiko's wedding and the Vulcan ambassador are nice stories, but they are more like B stories both. If there's any criticism I have of this episode is that Keiko is first introduced on the wedding day and a friend to Data's, but for the latter we see nothing before or after of this friendship, and in Miles' case, he is still mostly a blank slate, as at this point, well, until the next episode, of course. Still, as the focus is on Data, that's what makes it both entertaining and endearing, and a gusty character story for that matter, the one who theoretically cannot show emotions. Since in writing, Crusher did not have her drama workshop yet, the whole business of her being a secret dancer doesn't fit in the whole scheme of things, but for now is understandable. It is a great episode to get us to have empathy for Data, which to succeed when that already happened in The Offspring, I argue, is just as spectacular. Given that, as my criticism of Keiko being out of nowhere is an issue, I will give it 8 fake smiles while dancing out of 10. So, yeah, as far as the A plot, B plot, I just took it for granted that the Data stuff was the A plot. I think to me it was pretty obvious that the Romulan spy thing was the B plot. But I would lump the O'Brien's wedding within the Data's thing, because that's a part of his day. So I think Data's whole day is the A plot, which I suppose could include the Romulan thing, but the Romulan thing was more of a subplot. So I think that's more of a B plot, where the O'Brien wedding thing is more integrated in Data's A plot, but that's splitting hairs. And also, I forgot about Beverly Crusher doing the drama workshop. That will actually come up pretty soon in the episode The Nth Degree. Sorry. But I actually think that her dancing background actually fits in nicely, because a lot of people who are theater buffs also like dancing. Like, I knew personally, when I did theater for a little bit, a lot of people who were really good dancers who did both dancing and theater. So actually this tracks for me that maybe she just doesn't want to know because she garnered some reputation of being a top dancer, and she thinks it's silly and she doesn't want people to know about that, but she's more open about being involved in theater. And maybe, who knows, maybe she did, once she did theater in the while on the Enterprise, she got more comfortable with letting people know that she was also a good dancer. So totally tracks for me. And as far as Keiko not being introduced before this episode, yes, I think it would have been better had they built up to it and she didn't just appear on her wedding day. But I think, as I said earlier, if you're going to do this with any character, you got to do it with a minor character who doesn't really appear, like O'Brien, like Miles O'Brien, who we barely know. If you try to do it with a main cast member, that would have felt jarring at a place. Like, what the fuck is this person doing here? Not even Picard, even like Worf or like Data or someone like that. You can't just come out of nowhere and say, oh, they've been dating this person off screen and now they're ready to get married. Like, no, you can't fucking do that. But with O'Brien, it's still a bit jarring, but it's more excusable. Alright, so next comment is from Ricky, who says, this episode is unique to be, as in this episode, it is a data-centric episode. For this gives me a strong Lost and the Leftovers feeling to me, as in both of those shows, when an episode is focused on a certain character, we see and focus in that character's viewpoint, and see this as a big positive on this episode, as it really fleshes Data really fleshes Data more, and also it's great to spend an entire episode on how he views certain things like the O'Brien and Keiko wedding. We also see him tap dancing with Crusher, which was a nice, fun scene. I really appreciate this type of storytelling, although I wouldn't call it a great or an amazing episode. It was still a pretty good one. My rating is a 7 out of 10. I never thought of that comparison to Lost or The Leftovers. That actually makes a lot of sense, particularly Lost, when they would have the centric episode where every episode would focus on a different character and we get their flashbacks. We needed Data flashbacks. Anyway, but I can see that. So next comment is from Brandon Neil Howells, who says, Pinocchio's Day. Why are the lights turned off during the night shift? No matter how many times I see this episode, the first time Data gets referred to as the father of the bride, and an incredulous voice inside my head shouts, "But Lal is dead." I do wish we had seen Keiko a few times before her wedding day. No doubt Miles feels the same, or otherwise he wouldn't be spending so much time in Quark's holosuite with Julian Bashir on Deep Space Nine years later. I don't like Keiko as a character. She is a petulant teenager who is afraid to commit to a relationship. Really pisses me off the way Star Trek writes so many of its romance as if the participants were still in high school. I do enjoy Worf and Data's mutual discomfort over attending weddings and buying wedding gifts. I don't think the spy plot and the wedding plot go together. I'm still not sure if the spy plot had a point, and I doubt the writers know either. I'm not sure who has the stupider headwear, Ambassador T'Pel or Keiko. While watching Crusher teaching Data to tap dance, I was reminded of his comedy routine in The Outrageous Okana. Did anyone else think Data's holographic dance partner bore a resemblance to Tasha Yar? I can't get Data's gruesome smile out of my head. 3 firsts for this episode. Keiko, the Bolian barber who isn't Mott. Data has a cat unnamed as of yet. And while Picard is uncomfortable around children, he does seem to have a fondness for newborn babies, which doesn't ring true to me. I am confused by this episode. 5 lunkheads out of 10. I like that whole thing with this, the whole thing of him calling Geordi a lunkhead. I thought that was actually cool. Yeah, Data's gruesome smile, that really did creep me out, and I don't think he would actually smile like that. I think that's another thing that was kind of out of character for him. Like, he was like over the top, like no. Oh yeah, and I forgot about the barber scene where they show the Bolian barber for the first time. Mott, if I remember correctly, they only actually showed him once in the episode Ensign Road. They mentioned him a lot after that, but I think they only showed him once, maybe twice. But now there was a different Bolian barber this time. I don't know why they got to deal with Bolian barbers. Why do I really need a barber? Do they really need a barber in the 21st century? Like, this seems like automated computers would be able to do that better. But anyway, yeah, the thing with Keiko and Miles, I did actually buy their relationship, particularly on Deep Space Nine. And I don't think that Miles was trying to hide from Keiko, because I was just watching an episode of Deep Space Nine and they made it very clear when Keiko went to Bayshore that he was freaking out and didn't know what to do with himself, and that's why he was bothering Bashir all the time, because he tried to distract himself from the fact that she was away, which he absolutely hated. So I stand by, I really did like that relationship a lot. And the dancing didn't make me think of the Outrageous Okana, because nothing is as terrible and as cringe and as bad as that stupid episode. Fuck that episode. Anyway, thank you so much, patrons, for your comments. Anyway, my rating for Data's Day out of 10 is an 8. Extremely good. Now, I didn't realize that I'd give this episode this high of a rating because it's not one of my favorite episodes. It's never been. But it's an 8. It's not a 10 or anything. But, and to be honest, it's a very low 8 because I was kind of torn between a 7 and an 8. For this episode, it kind of hits that range for me. If I did 0.5s, I'd probably give it a 7.5, but I don't do 0.5s. So I'll say it's a low 8. Yeah, because I think the way it explored Data's character and aspects of him wanting a relationship, I love that, his letter to Maddox and how at the end he's saying that he understood love, and I think they did an amazing job integrating the A and B plot. I think they utilized, because the Romulan thing I don't think is interesting enough to take center stage, and I think seeing it from Data's perspective, who was just a tertiary character in that storyline, was really interesting. It was a unique way at looking at a story like this and probably made it way more interesting than it would have been otherwise. So all those things made me push it up to an 8. But I do agree that he was a little bit out of character at the start, and sometimes in the episode where he was being so obtuse over the Keiko Miles thing. And I don't know, other times it seems like they were just being a bit too cutesy with, this is a day in the life in Data. So I don't think it's an amazing episode or anything like that, but it's decent. Like, it's a strong, decent episode. So that is it for my review of Data's Day. So let me just bring up my schedule here to see what's coming up on my channel. Tomorrow will be my review for Star Trek Discovery episodes 1 and 2. Can't wait for that. Season 5, of course. Yeah. And so that's coming out Thursday, tomorrow, and then on Saturday I'll be over on Patreon for my revisited for The Wounded. I'll revisit my review for that episode for my Patreon supporters. And then on Monday I'll be back here on the main channel with a video essay for the myth of franchise fatigue and why it's dangerous. This will have a particular focus on Star Trek, on how I think people talk about franchise fatigue is a myth. It's not true. It didn't happen. Anyway, Wednesday, sticking on my main channel for a review for Devil's Due. And Thursday, the next episode of Discovery I shall review. So that's what's coming up on my channel, so be sure to check it out. Check out my channel as I continue to cover Star Trek and many other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.